No one touches the Luna throne unless the moon herself has chosen them. The words had been spoken so many times that they no longer sounded like a warning. They sounded like a law carved into bone. The great hall of Vermont stretched wide as a cathedral, its vaulted ceilings disappearing into shadow while chandeliers of silver and crystal cast a cold, unwavering light across polished stone floors. At the far end of the hall, elevated by 7 shallow steps, stood the throne. It was not large in the way mortal thrones were, not adorned with gold or excessive ornamentation, yet it commanded the space with a quiet authority that pressed against the lungs. Carved from pale stone that seemed to hold its own faint glow, the Luna throne stood untouched, as it had for generations, waiting for someone no one believed would ever come. Lillian Brooks stood near the back of the hall, her hands clasped loosely in front of her as if she were trying to take up less space than she already did. Her dress was simple, soft gray fabric that blended too easily with the shadows, and her shoes, slightly worn at the edges, made no sound against the marble beneath her feet. She had learned long ago how to move quietly, how to exist without drawing attention, how to survive in a world that measured worth in strength, presence, and power, things she had never been allowed to claim. Around her, voices murmured in low currents, the air thick with expectation and restrained ambition. The scent of polished wood, cool stone, and something sharper, something like anticipation, hung in the air. Tonight was not a night for mistakes. Tonight, every movement was watched, every glance measured. And yet, no one was watching her. Not really. A group of noble women stood several feet ahead, their gowns shimmering in deep blues and silvers, their laughter soft, but edged with something sharper. One of them glanced back briefly, her eyes passing over Lillian as though she were nothing more than a misplaced shadow, and then she turned away without pause. It was a familiar look. Not cruel, not openly dismissive, just absent, as if Lillian simply did not belong in the frame of their world. She lowered her gaze, not out of submission, but out of habit. It was easier that way. Easier to avoid the weight of eyes that might question her presence. Easier to avoid becoming the subject of quiet ridicule. Because in a hall like this, filled with the most powerful wolves in the territory, someone like her stood out precisely because she did not. At the center of it all, the throne remained still, untouched, sacred. No one approached it. Not the high-ranking alphas who stood with rigid posture near the front. Not the elegantly poised candidates who had spent years preparing for a moment like this. Even they kept their distance, as though an invisible boundary circled the base of those 7 steps. It was said the throne would never accept the wrong person. It was said the moment someone unworthy dared to sit upon it, the silence of the room would turn against them. No one wanted to test that truth. Lillian lifted her eyes just slightly, just enough to look toward it. For a moment, just a moment, she felt something she couldn't explain. Not fear, not awe, something quieter, like recognition. The thought vanished as quickly as it came, slipping away before she could hold on to it. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself, reminding her heart to keep its rhythm. She didn't belong anywhere near that throne. Everyone knew that. She knew that. And yet, as the hall continued to fill, as footsteps echoed and voices rose and fell like distant waves, the throne seemed to remain exactly as it had been when she first looked at it, silent, waiting, and somehow aware. The longer Lillian stood there, the more the air seemed to tighten around her, as if the hall itself were slowly drawing a breath it refused to release. Conversations continued, but they carried a sharper edge now, quieter and more deliberate, as though everyone was aware that something important hovered just out of sight. Servants moved along the perimeter with careful precision, offering crystal glasses filled with pale wine, their footsteps measured and silent, never once crossing the invisible boundary that led toward the raised platform. That space remained untouched, sacred in a way that needed no explanation. Lillian shifted her weight slightly, her fingers brushing against the side of her dress, grounding herself in something real, something simple. She had been invited only because every unmated woman of age was required to attend. That was the rule. It had nothing to do with her worth and everything to do with appearances. The territory had to show unity, completeness, the illusion that every possibility had been considered, even the ones no one expected to matter. A low voice drifted from her right, close enough that she could not ignore it. Some people should know better than to stand this close. Lillian turned her head just enough to see the speaker, a young woman with dark hair pinned into an intricate style, her expression composed, but her eyes unmistakably dismissive. There was no direct insult in her tone, only the quiet certainty of someone who had never been questioned. Lillian did not respond. She simply inclined her head slightly and stepped half a foot back, giving the impression of compliance without truly retreating. It was a small movement, but it was enough. The woman looked satisfied and turned away, her attention already claimed by someone else more worthy of it. Lillian exhaled slowly, her gaze dropping once more, but this time it lingered on the steps leading up to the throne. 7 steps, each one worn smooth by time, though no one living had ever climbed them with purpose. The distance between where she stood and where the throne waited did not seem far. 10 yards, perhaps, close enough that she could count the faint lines etched into the stone, symbols older than the territory itself. She did not know what they meant, only that they carried weight, the kind that settled into the chest and refused to leave. A sudden ripple passed through the crowd, subtle but unmistakable. Conversations paused, shoulders straightened, and heads turned toward the main entrance of the hall. The doors had not opened yet, but something had shifted. The atmosphere sharpened, anticipation tightening into something almost electric. Lillian felt it too, though she did not lift her eyes immediately. She did not need to see to understand. He was coming. The Alpha King did not arrive unnoticed. He did not need an announcement or ceremony to declare his presence. The room itself reacted to him, bending slightly, adjusting as though it recognized something greater entering its space. Lillian finally allowed herself to glance up, just briefly, just enough to catch the movement near the doors as they began to open with a slow, deliberate sound. Light from the corridor spilled into the hall, cutting a pale path across the floor. Figures shifted, stepping aside instinctively, creating space without being told. She did not see him clearly yet, only the outline, the suggestion of height and stillness that carried more authority than any raised voice ever could. Her heart tightened, not from fear exactly, but from awareness. This was not a world she belonged to. Not truly. And yet she stood within it, close enough to feel its gravity, close enough to be pulled in whether she wanted it or not. The doors opened wider, and the presence that followed did not rush forward. It moved at its own pace, unhurried, certain, as if time itself would adjust to match it. Around Lillian, people lowered their gazes, a silent acknowledgement that needed no instruction. She followed suit, her chin dipping slightly, her focus returning to the stone beneath her feet. Safe, quiet, unseen. That was where she existed best. But even as she tried to disappear into that familiar space, she could feel it again. That faint, inexplicable pull. Not from the entrance this time. From the throne. It was subtle, almost impossible to define, like a whisper at the edge of her thoughts. She did not look up. She did not move. And yet the awareness remained, steady and patient, as though something in that silent, waiting seat had already noticed her long before she had dared to notice it. The moment his presence settled fully into the hall, everything else seemed to rearrange itself around it. Conversations did not stop entirely, but they softened into something more careful, more deliberate, as though each word now had to pass through an unseen filter before it could be spoken. Lillian kept her gaze lowered, yet she could feel the shift ripple outward like a change in pressure before a storm. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was absolute. Footsteps moved across the marble floor with measured certainty, unhurried and controlled, each one echoing just enough to remind everyone exactly who had entered the room. She did not need to look to know where he was. The awareness tracked his movement instinctively, a quiet pull in her chest that tightened with every step he took closer to the center of the hall. Somewhere ahead, a voice began to speak, formal and practiced, announcing titles and lineage in a tone that carried authority but not dominance. That belonged to him. Whatever he was, he did not need volume to command attention. Lillian allowed herself a brief glance upward, just long enough to see him take his place. Dominic Voss stood at the front, not on the throne, never on the throne, but near it, within its reach and yet distinctly separate. He was taller than most of the men around him, his posture relaxed in a way that did not diminish his presence but sharpened it. There was no excess in him, no unnecessary movement, no wasted energy. Even stillness seemed intentional. His dark clothing contrasted against the pale stone behind him, and the light from above caught faintly along the edges of his shoulders, outlining him without softening him. His expression revealed nothing. Not approval, not disinterest, not curiosity, just control. Lillian dropped her gaze again, her pulse steady but aware. She had heard stories, of course. Everyone had. Stories about a ruler who did not bend, who did not hesitate, who did not choose lightly. But standing in the same room as him made those stories feel incomplete, like they had been told from too far away to understand what they truly meant. The formal proceedings began, structured and predictable. Names were called, one by one, each woman stepping forward just enough to be seen, to be acknowledged, to exist within the moment before stepping back again. It was not a selection yet. Not officially. It was presentation. Proof of presence. Proof of possibility. Lillian listened as each name echoed through the hall. Each one met with varying degrees of interest, approval, or polite indifference. She remained where she was, unmoving, her hands still clasped, her breathing even. She did not expect her name to matter. When it finally came, it was spoken without emphasis, no pause, no shift in tone to mark it as anything more than an obligation fulfilled. Lillian Brooks. The sound of it seemed to land softly, barely disturbing the air before it faded. A few heads turned, more out of habit than curiosity, their eyes passing over her quickly, already moving on. No one stepped aside to make space for her. No one waited. She did not move forward. There was no reason to. Her presence had been acknowledged. That was enough. Or it should have been. A faint murmur stirred somewhere in the room, not directed at her exactly, but near enough that she could feel its edge. She should not even be here. The words were not loud, but they did not need to be. They carried the quiet certainty of agreement, of a belief shared by more than one voice. Lillian did not react. She did not flinch, did not tighten her hands, did not let her breathing change. If she had learned anything, it was how to let words pass through her without leaving marks. Still, something shifted inside her. Not anger, not hurt, something steadier. A quiet refusal to disappear entirely, even if the world insisted she should. At the front of the hall, Dominic Voss remained still, his gaze moving across the room with measured precision. For a moment, it paused. Not long enough for anyone to notice. Not long enough to mean anything. And yet, for the briefest second, Lillian felt it. Not like a weight pressing down, but like a line drawn, faint and invisible, connecting 2 points across a distance that should have remained empty. She did not look up to confirm it. She did not need to, because the moment passed as quickly as it had come, and the room continued exactly as it had before. Except it did not feel the same anymore. And neither did she. Somewhere behind her, someone shifted impatiently, brushing past just close enough to disrupt her balance for half a step. It was small, barely noticeable, the kind of contact that could be dismissed as accidental. But it nudged her forward, just enough to bring her closer to the open space leading toward the steps, closer to the place no one dared to approach. Lillian steadied herself immediately, her foot finding solid ground again, her posture correcting as if nothing had happened. She could have stepped back. She should have stepped back. That was where she belonged. And yet, for reasons she could not explain, she did not move. Not yet. The throne remained ahead of her, silent and waiting, its presence unchanged and yet somehow aware. The space in front of her felt different now, no longer just open but expectant, as though something unseen had shifted its attention fully onto her. Lillian stood still for a moment longer, her breath slow and measured, her fingers loosening slightly at her sides. She was closer than she had ever intended to be, close enough to see the faint texture of the stone steps, to notice how the light seemed to gather differently there, softer yet somehow brighter at the same time. Behind her, the quiet hum of conversation continued, but it no longer reached her the same way. It felt distant, muffled, like sound carried through water. "Move," a voice whispered behind her, low and edged with irritation. The word brushed past her shoulder like a passing breeze, followed by the subtle pressure of someone stepping forward, expecting her to give way. Lillian shifted instinctively, turning slightly to the side, but the motion did not carry her back. Instead, It angled her forward, one step closer to the base of the stairs. The person behind her paused, clearly not expecting that, then moved around her with a faint exhale of annoyance, their attention already elsewhere. No one stopped her. No one called her back. And yet, no one encouraged her either. It was as if she had slipped into a space that existed just outside of everyone else's awareness. Lillian looked up before she could stop herself. The throne stood directly ahead now, no longer distant, no longer something to be observed from the safety of the crowd. Up close, it felt different. The pale stone carried a subtle warmth beneath its surface, almost like it held a quiet pulse, something steady and patient. The carved lines along its edges were more intricate than she had realized, not decorative but deliberate, each one placed with purpose. She did not understand their meaning, but she could feel their weight. 7 steps. She could count them clearly now. The first one was less than a foot away. She should step back. The thought came immediately, firm and logical. This was not her place. It never had been. Everything she had learned, everything she had lived, told her the same thing. Step back. Return to where you belong. Lillian inhaled slowly, preparing to do exactly that. But her feet did not move. Instead, her gaze lifted slightly higher, drawn to the seat itself. It was not imposing, not in the way she expected. It did not tower or overwhelm. It simply existed, steady and certain, as though it had no need to prove what it was. For a brief moment, something flickered in her chest again. That same quiet, unexplainable feeling. Not fear, not awe, recognition. Her hand lifted before she could stop it, fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the first step. The stone was smooth beneath her touch, cool at first, then warming almost instantly, as if responding to her presence. Lillian stilled, her breath catching for the smallest fraction of a second. That should not have happened. She withdrew her hand quickly, her heart beating just a little faster now, not from panic, but from something closer to uncertainty. Around her, the hall continued as it had before. Names were still being spoken. Movements continued in careful patterns. No one seemed to notice where she stood. No one seemed to notice what she had just done. The distance between her and the throne felt smaller now, though she had not moved again. Or maybe she had. She was not entirely sure anymore. A faint sound echoed from the far end of the hall, drawing attention briefly away from the center, and in that moment, the invisible line that separated her from the steps seemed to dissolve completely. Lillian shifted her weight forward, almost unconsciously. One step. The sole of her shoe met the first stair. Nothing happened. No voice called out. No sudden interruption broke the air. The world did not stop. Encouraged by the absence of consequence, she moved again, slower this time, more aware. 2 steps. 3. Each one felt the same beneath her feet, solid, steady, welcoming in a way that made no sense. She should have felt resistance. She should have felt something pushing her back. But there was nothing. Only that quiet, persistent pull, guiding her forward without force. By the time she reached the final step, her pulse had steadied again, her thoughts strangely calm, as if whatever part of her that should have questioned this had been gently set aside. The throne was directly in front of her now, close enough that she could see the faint glow within the stone more clearly, subtle but unmistakable, like light held just beneath the surface. Lillian hesitated, her hand hovering slightly at her side. This was the moment where she should stop. This was where she should turn around and leave before anyone noticed, before anything changed. Her gaze lingered on the seat, her breathing quiet, her body perfectly still. For 1 second, 2, and then, without fully deciding to, she moved. She lowered herself onto the throne as if she were simply resting for a moment, as if it meant nothing at all, as if she had always belonged there. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. The hall continued as it had before, voices low, movement steady, the distant echo of footsteps and soft conversation carrying through the vast space. Lillian's weight settled against the stone seat, her hands resting lightly at her sides, her posture still and composed, as if she had simply taken a place that had always been hers. The surface beneath her felt different than she expected. Not cold, not lifeless. It held a quiet warmth that spread slowly, steadily, through the fabric of her dress and into her skin, like the faint heat of sunlight on stone after a long winter. She blinked once, her breath catching in her chest as awareness returned all at once. This was wrong. The realization struck clearly now, sharp and undeniable. She should not be here. She should stand up. Immediately, Lillian shifted slightly, her muscles preparing to rise. But before she could move, something changed. It began beneath her, subtle at first, like a pulse too faint to notice unless she was already paying attention. Then it grew, not in force, not in intensity, but in presence. The stone responded. A soft glow emerged from within the throne, not bursting outward, but seeping through the carved lines and edges, illuminating the ancient patterns with a quiet, steady light. It was not bright enough to blind, but it was unmistakable. It was alive. Lillian froze. Her breath slowed, her body stilled, not out of fear, but because something deeper told her that movement would break something fragile and important. The warmth beneath her deepened, spreading up her spine, across her shoulders, down her arms, until it settled into her chest, right where that strange, quiet feeling had been building since she entered the hall. It did not hurt. It did not overwhelm. It simply existed, steady and certain, as though it had always been there, waiting for this exact moment to reveal itself. Around her, the change did not go unnoticed. The hum of the hall faltered. One voice stopped, then another, until the sound of conversation unraveled completely, leaving behind a silence so sudden it felt almost tangible. Lillian could feel it, the way the entire room shifted its attention, not gradually, but all at once. Eyes turned. Breath held. Time itself seemed to hesitate. She did not look up. She did not need to. The glow intensified slightly, tracing the edges of the throne, outlining her silhouette in soft light. It did not flicker. It did not waver. It remained constant, unwavering in a way that made it feel less like an event and more like a truth being revealed. Lillian's fingers curled slightly against the armrests, not gripping, not resisting, simply grounding herself in the moment. She tried again to stand, to correct what she had done, but the motion never fully formed. It was not that she could not move. It was that something within her chose not to. The idea of leaving the seat felt wrong. Not forbidden. Not dangerous. Just incorrect, like stepping away from something that had already been decided. A soft sound broke the silence behind her, a breath drawn too sharply, followed by the faint shuffle of movement as someone shifted in place. Then another. The room was no longer still. It was tense. Lillian lifted her gaze slowly, her eyes moving forward, not yet turning to face the crowd, but aware of them in a way she had never been before. The weight of their attention did not press down on her the way it used to. It surrounded her, yes, but it did not diminish her. It did not make her smaller. For the first time, it felt distant, as if she existed just outside of its reach. The glow continued, steady and calm, as though it had no intention of fading. No one spoke. No one moved toward her. No one dared. The throne had made its choice without asking permission, without warning, without explanation. And now, it held that choice firmly, leaving no space for doubt. Lillian sat in silence, her breathing even, her posture unchanged, the light of the throne wrapping around her like something ancient and deliberate. And in that stillness, in that impossible quiet, one truth settled over the room with undeniable clarity. The seat had accepted her, and it was not letting go. No one moved at first. The silence held, stretched thin across the vast hall, like something fragile that could shatter with the smallest sound. Lillian remained seated, her spine straight but not rigid, her hands resting lightly against the armrests as the faint glow beneath her continued to pulse with quiet certainty. The warmth had settled deeper now, no longer spreading but anchoring itself within her, steady and calm, as though it had always belonged there. She could hear her own breathing, soft and even, and beneath it, something else, something quieter, almost like a rhythm that did not come from her body alone. It was not a sound exactly, but a presence, a synchronization, as if the throne and her heartbeat had found the same pace. A sudden shift broke the stillness behind her. A single step echoed sharply against the marble floor, followed by another, more hesitant this time. Lillian did not turn, but she felt the movement, felt the attention gathering and focusing, no longer uncertain, no longer distant. Someone was approaching. Stand up. The voice was controlled, firm. without being raised, carrying the kind of authority that expected to be obeyed without question. It came from her right, not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel. Lillian's fingers tightened slightly against the stone, not in defiance, but in awareness. She knew that tone. Everyone in the room did. It was not a request. It was a correction. Slowly, carefully, she shifted her weight forward, preparing to rise, to fix what had clearly become a disruption far greater than she had intended. Her muscles responded. Her body moved. But the moment she tried to lift herself fully from the seat, something stopped her. Not a force. Not pressure. There was no resistance pushing her down. And yet, the motion would not complete. It was as if the action itself simply did not exist anymore. Lillian stilled, her breath catching slightly, her gaze lowering for a moment as she tried again, more deliberately this time. She leaned forward, pressing her weight through her feet, engaging every movement she knew should allow her to stand. Nothing changed. The throne remained steady beneath her, the glow unwavering, the warmth constant. It did not hold her in place physically. It simply did not release her. A quiet ripple moved through the crowd. Not loud, not chaotic, but unmistakable. The kind of reaction that comes when something understood suddenly becomes uncertain. She cannot even follow a simple instruction. Another voice murmured, softer, edged with disbelief rather than anger. Lillian closed her eyes briefly, not to escape, but to center herself. This was not defiance. This was not a refusal. She was trying. And yet, something deeper, something older than the rules of the room, had already made a decision without her. She opened her eyes again, her expression composed, her posture still calm despite the tension building around her. "I am trying," she said quietly, her voice steady, carrying just enough to be heard without forcing its way into the silence. It was not an excuse. It was not an apology. It was the truth. The glow beneath her pulsed once, slightly brighter, the carved lines along the throne illuminating more clearly, as if responding to her words. A collective breath seemed to pass through the room, subtle but shared. The presence behind her shifted again, closer now. Lillian could feel it, not as pressure, but as awareness, sharper and more focused. And then, for the first time since she had sat down, something changed in the balance of the room. Not in the throne. Not in her. In him. Dominic Voss moved. It was not a sudden action. It was not dramatic. He simply stepped forward. One step, then another. The sound of his movement carried through the silence with quiet precision, drawing every eye, every breath, every thought toward him. The authority that had filled the room when he entered shifted again, no longer distant, no longer passive. It became something active, deliberate. Lillian did not turn to look at him. She did not need to. The awareness she had felt before returned, stronger now, clearer, like a line drawn directly between them. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that the space between them felt intentional. The room waited. No one spoke. No one interrupted. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, slowly, the weight of his attention settled fully on her. Not dismissive, not questioning. Something else. Something quieter. Something far more dangerous. Lillian remained still beneath it, her breathing even, her expression unchanged, the glow of the throne steady around her. And for the first time since she had entered the hall, the silence did not feel like something pressing down on her. It felt like something opening, waiting. The distance between them felt smaller than it should have been, as if the space itself had quietly folded inward, drawing everything into a single, unavoidable moment. Lillian kept her gaze forward at first, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady despite the shift in the air that now centered entirely around him. She could feel it clearly now, the full weight of Dominic Voss's attention, not as pressure, but as presence. It did not push. It did not demand. It simply existed, undeniable and absolute. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she lifted her eyes. The movement was small, controlled, but it changed everything. For the first time, their gazes met without distance, without interruption, without anything left to soften the moment. His expression remained composed, unreadable in the way only someone completely in control could maintain. There was no visible surprise, no immediate reaction to what had happened, and yet something in his eyes had shifted. It was subtle, nearly impossible to name, but it was there. Not dismissal, not disbelief, something closer to recognition. Lillian held that gaze for a fraction of a second longer than she should have, then lowered her eyes again, not out of submission, but because the intensity of it felt too precise, too direct, as if it saw more than she was prepared to show. Around them, the room remained silent, the kind of silence that carried awareness rather than absence. Every person present was watching, waiting for something, anything, that would explain what they were seeing. But no one spoke. No one moved to interfere. Because whatever this was, it was no longer something they could control. Dominic took one more step forward, closing the remaining distance until he stood just at the base of the steps. He did not ascend. He did not reach for her. He simply stopped, his gaze steady, his presence anchoring the moment in place. Lillian became acutely aware of the throne beneath her again, the warmth still constant, the faint glow unchanged, as if it recognized him just as it had recognized her. Not reacting, not adjusting, simply acknowledging. The connection in the air sharpened, not between the crowd and the throne, but between the two of them. Unspoken, unexplained, a line drawn clearly enough that it no longer needed to be imagined. Look at me. His voice was quiet, not raised, but it carried through the hall with complete clarity. It was not an order delivered with force. It was something else, something that expected to be answered without resistance. Lillian hesitated for only a second before lifting her gaze again. This time, she did not look away. The moment held. His eyes studied her, not in the way others had, not with judgment or dismissal, but with a focus that felt deliberate, measured, as though he was searching for something he already suspected was there. She did not move. She did not speak. The throne beneath her pulsed once, faint but visible, the light tracing along its edges in a soft, steady rhythm. The reaction it drew from the room was immediate, though still restrained. A collective shift, a realization settling into place. This was not a coincidence. This was not an accident that could be corrected or ignored. Dominic's gaze flickered briefly to the throne, then back to her, the smallest shift in attention that did not break the connection but deepened it. For a moment, he said nothing. And in that silence, the weight of understanding began to form. Not complete, not fully spoken, but present. Lillian felt it too. The way the uncertainty that had surrounded her since she stepped forward was slowly being replaced by something steadier. She did not understand what was happening. She did not know why the throne had responded to her. But the fear she expected to feel never fully formed. Instead, there was something quieter, something grounded. As if whatever this was, it was not meant to break her. It was meant to reveal something she had never been allowed to see. The room waited for his decision. That much was clear. Because whatever happened next would define what this moment meant. Not just for her. For everyone. Dominic remained still for another breath, his expression unchanged, his presence unwavering. Then, slowly, deliberately, he shifted his stance, not stepping back, not stepping forward, but adjusting in a way that signaled something had been decided. No announcement followed. No explanation was given. But the silence itself changed. It no longer felt uncertain. It felt inevitable. And in that quiet, undeniable shift, one truth settled into place with absolute clarity. This moment was no longer about whether she should be there. It was about what it meant that she already was. The silence did not break, but it changed shape, tightening around the center of the hall until it felt almost visible, like a held breath shared by everyone in the room. Lillian remained seated, her posture steady, her gaze still lifted toward Dominic Voss, no longer avoiding, no longer retreating. The connection between them had not faded. If anything, it had sharpened, defined now by something neither of them had spoken, yet neither could ignore. The throne beneath her pulsed again, slightly brighter this time, the soft glow tracing upward along the carved edges before settling back into its steady rhythm. It was not erratic. It was not unstable. It was controlled, deliberate, as if it were responding not to the room, but to him. A faint shift moved through the crowd, more noticeable now, less restrained. Someone stepped forward from the side, the movement careful but urgent enough to break the stillness. "Your Majesty," the voice came, respectful but edged with unease. "This cannot be allowed." The words did not echo loudly, but they carried far enough to ripple through the tension that had settled across the hall. Lillian did not turn toward the speaker. She remained exactly where she was, her awareness fixed forward, her senses tuned to the presence in front of her. Dominic did not respond immediately. He did not look toward the one who had spoken. His attention remained on her, unwavering, as though the rest of the room had momentarily ceased to matter. That alone shifted the balance again, subtle but undeniable. The man who had spoken hesitated, his confidence faltering slightly in the absence of acknowledgement. The throne has not chosen in generations, he continued, more cautiously now. There must be an explanation. A mistake. The last word lingered longer than it should have, as if saying it might somehow make it true. Lillian felt the word settle in the air, felt the way it brushed against the quiet certainty growing within her. A mistake. That was what she had believed at first, what she should still believe. And yet, nothing about this felt accidental anymore. The warmth within her chest deepened slightly, steady and calm, as if answering the doubt without needing to argue against it. Dominic's gaze shifted then, not breaking away from her entirely, but sliding just enough to acknowledge the presence at the edge of the moment. His expression remained composed, but there was a subtle change in it now, something colder, more defined. Not anger, not frustration. Authority. Do you see hesitation? He asked quietly. The question was simple, direct, and it did not require him to raise his voice. The effect was immediate. The man who had spoken fell silent, the uncertainty in his stance becoming more apparent. No one answered. No one could, because there was none. The throne continued to glow. Lillian remained seated. Nothing faltered. Nothing wavered. Dominic's attention returned fully to her, and for a moment, the rest of the hall faded again, leaving only the space between them. Stand, he said. The word was not forceful. It was not sharp. It carried no visible demand, only a quiet expectation, as though he was testing something rather than correcting it. Lillian felt the shift immediately, not in the room, but within herself. She understood what he was asking. She had tried before. She had failed. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hands against the armrests, her body preparing to rise once more. The throne pulsed beneath her, the light intensifying just slightly, as if acknowledging the attempt before it even began. She leaned forward, her muscles responding, her weight shifting, every part of her moving exactly as it should. And yet, once again, the motion stopped before it could complete. Not resisted, not blocked, simply undone. Lillian exhaled softly, her expression unchanged, her voice steady when she spoke. I cannot. The words were quiet, but they carried clearly, unshaken by embarrassment or fear. They were not an excuse. They were a statement. The glow responded, brightening for a brief moment before settling again, as if confirming what she had said rather than contradicting it. A murmur moved through the crowd, no longer fully contained, the tension shifting into something closer to realization. This was not defiance. This was not error. This was something else entirely. Dominic did not look surprised. He did not question her. Instead, something in his gaze shifted again, deeper this time, more certain. The line between them, already drawn, now felt anchored, undeniable in a way that no one in the room could ignore. He stepped forward again, closing the last of the distance between them, until he stood directly before the throne, close enough that the glow touched him, faintly outlining his form in the same soft light that surrounded her. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply stood there, looking at her, as if the answer he had been searching for had already been given. And in that stillness, in that quiet, deliberate pause, the truth settled into the room with a clarity no one could deny. The throne had not made a mistake, and neither had he. The air shifted again, but this time it did not carry uncertainty. It carried weight, the kind that settles slowly, deliberately, until it becomes impossible to ignore. Lillian sat perfectly still, her hands relaxed against the armrests, her gaze steady on Dominic Voss as he stood before her, close enough that the faint glow of the throne traced the sharp lines of his silhouette. The light did not diminish in his presence. It did not retreat. It remained constant, wrapping around both of them as if it recognized no separation between where she ended and where he began. That alone changed everything. Behind him, the hall no longer felt like a place of observation. It felt like a place of witness. The difference was subtle, but absolute. No one was waiting for this to be corrected anymore. They were waiting to understand what it meant. A quiet breath moved through the room, followed by the faintest shift of movement as someone adjusted their stance, unable to remain completely still under the weight of what was unfolding. But no one stepped forward again. No one interrupted, because whatever authority they believed they held did not reach this moment. Lillian felt it clearly now, not just around her, but within her. The uncertainty that had followed her steps to the throne had faded completely, replaced by something steadier. Not confidence. Not yet. But something close to it. Something that did not need permission to exist. Her heartbeat remained calm, synchronized with that quiet rhythm beneath her, as though the throne had anchored her to something far older than the room, older than the rules that had once defined her place within it. Dominic's gaze did not waver. It did not soften, but it changed again, in a way that could not be mistaken. The distance between observation and acknowledgement had closed. He was no longer assessing what he saw. He was accepting it. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his hand. The movement was controlled, precise, drawing every eye in the hall without needing to demand their attention. Lillian's breath caught slightly, not from fear, but from awareness. This was the moment where something irreversible would happen. His hand paused briefly in the air, not reaching for her, not touching, simply hovering in that space between intention and action. Then, just as slowly, he lowered it again. He did not touch her. He did not need to. The gesture alone had already carried meaning. It was not possession. It was not control. It was recognition. A murmur rippled through the room, no longer restrained, no longer uncertain. It moved like a wave, quiet but undeniable, carrying the same realization from one end of the hall to the other. Lillian did not turn to look at them. She did not need to see their expressions to understand what had changed. The way they watched her now was not the same. It was no longer dismissive. It was no longer indifferent. It was something else entirely. Dominic stepped closer, the final inch of distance disappearing until he stood directly before the throne, his presence fully within the circle of light. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt complete, not empty, but filled with everything that did not need to be said. Then, quietly, with no force and no hesitation, he lowered his head. It was not a deep motion. It was not exaggerated. It was small, controlled, almost subtle. But it was unmistakable. The room felt it immediately. The shift was instant, like something ancient had just aligned itself into place after being forgotten for far too long. Lillian's breath stilled, her eyes widening slightly before she could stop herself. She had expected many things. Confusion, rejection, even command. But not this. Not from him. Not from someone who did not bend. The glow of the throne pulsed once more, brighter now, the light wrapping around both of them as if confirming what had just been done. Not questioned, not debated, confirmed. Behind him, the reaction came in a wave, not loud, not chaotic, but profound. Bodies shifted, heads lowered. The room responded instinctively, not because they were told to, but because they understood. This was no longer an event. This was a declaration. Lillian felt the change settle over her, not as pressure, but as clarity. Whatever she had been before this moment no longer held the same weight. Whatever place she had once been given no longer defined where she stood now. She did not move. She did not speak. She simply remained where she was, the throne steady beneath her, the light unwavering, the moment fixed in place. And in that quiet, undeniable stillness, one truth became absolute. The choice had been made, and it was not going to be undone. The shift did not stop at the bow. It moved outward, spreading through the hall like something inevitable, something that had been waiting beneath the surface of every rule, every expectation, every unspoken boundary. Lillian felt it settle into place, not as pressure, but as certainty. The moment did not rush forward. It deepened. Dominic Voss straightened slowly, his posture returning to its natural stillness, but something had changed in the space around him. It was not less powerful. It was more defined, as if the authority he carried had just aligned with something older than himself. His gaze lifted again to meet hers, and this time, there was no distance left between recognition and acceptance. Whatever question had existed before was gone. Lillian held that gaze, her breathing steady, though her awareness had sharpened in a way she could not ignore. The throne beneath her pulsed once more, brighter than before, the light tracing along the carved patterns and spilling faintly onto the steps below. It did not feel unstable. It felt complete, as if the final piece of something unseen had just settled into place. Behind him, the hall responded in quiet, instinctive motion. One by one, heads lowered. Not dramatically, not all at once, but steadily, like a ripple that moved from one side of the room to the other. It was not commanded. It was not announced. It was understood. Lillian noticed it without turning, the shift in presence more than the movement itself. The way the room no longer watched her as an anomaly. The way it acknowledged her as something else entirely. Something that no longer needed to be questioned. A soft exhale left her, barely audible, as the weight of that realization settled into her chest. She had not earned this. She had not fought for it. She had not even sought it. And yet, it had found her. Or perhaps, it had always been waiting for her. Dominic stepped back half a pace, not in retreat, but in adjustment, creating space that felt deliberate rather than distancing. His attention did not leave her. It did not waver. But the movement shifted the balance of the moment, allowing something else to take form. A voice spoke again from the side, more careful now, more measured. "Your Majesty, what does this mean?" The question did not carry defiance this time. It carried uncertainty, a need for definition in a moment that had refused to explain itself. Dominic did not look toward the speaker immediately. He remained where he was, his gaze still on Lillian, as if the answer did not exist anywhere else. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, even, carrying through the hall with quiet authority. "It means the throne has chosen." The words settled into the silence without resistance, without contradiction. They did not need to be defended. They did not need to be explained, because the truth of them was already visible. Lillian felt something shift within her again, not the warmth, not the light, but something deeper. The uncertainty she had carried, the instinct to step back, to disappear, to question her place, all of it seemed to loosen its hold. Not vanish completely, but weaken. The throne pulsed softly beneath her, as if responding to that change, reinforcing it, anchoring it into something real. The voice from the side did not speak again. No one did, because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to correct. The moment had already moved beyond that point. Dominic's gaze softened just slightly, not in emotion, but in clarity, as if what he saw now no longer required analysis. Only acknowledgement. "Can you feel it?" he asked quietly. The question was not for the room. It was for her. Lillian paused, not because she did not understand, but because she did. She lowered her gaze briefly, her awareness turning inward, toward that steady warmth, that quiet rhythm that had settled into her chest. It was not overwhelming. It was not foreign. It felt right. She lifted her eyes again, meeting his without hesitation this time. "Yes," she said, her voice calm, grounded in a way it had never been before. The answer did not echo loudly, but it carried. And in that single word, something else shifted. Not in the throne. Not in him. In her. The glow responded once more, not brighter, not louder, but steadier. Final. As if the moment of becoming had just completed itself. The hall remained silent, but it was no longer tense. It was resolved. And in that quiet, unwavering stillness, one truth stood clear above all others. She had not taken the throne. She had been given to it, and it was not giving her back. The word lingered in the air long after it was spoken, settling into the stone walls, into the silence, into every breath that had yet to be released. Lillian remained still upon the throne, but something within her had shifted again, not in a sudden or overwhelming way, but in a quiet, undeniable alignment. The warmth she felt was no longer something she questioned. It had become part of her awareness, as natural as the rhythm of her own breathing. For the first time, she did not feel like she was sitting somewhere she did not belong. She felt placed, not by chance, not by mistake, but with intention she did not yet fully understand. Dominic Voss did not look away from her. That had not changed, but the nature of his attention had. It no longer searched. It no longer tested. It recognized. The subtle tension that had once existed in the line of his shoulders had eased, replaced by something steadier, something anchored. He was not reacting anymore. He was responding. Slowly, deliberately, he moved. Not away, not back into the crowd, but closer, stepping onto the first of the 7 stairs. The movement drew a collective breath from the room, not loud, but sharp. enough to ripple through the silence. No one followed. No one dared. Because what he was doing now was no longer part of any ceremony they understood. It was something else entirely. Lillian watched him approach, her gaze steady, her posture unchanged. As he ascended the steps, the light of the throne shifted subtly, not brighter, not dimmer, but more focused, as if it were adjusting to his presence without yielding to it. He did not rush. Each step was measured, controlled, as though the moment itself required that precision. When he reached the final step, he stopped just in front of her, close enough that she could see the exact shade of his eyes, the calm intensity within them, the clarity that had replaced all earlier uncertainty. The space between them felt smaller now, but not crowded. Defined. Lillian did not look away. She did not lower her gaze this time. Whatever she had been before this moment, the instinct to retreat, to make herself smaller, no longer held the same power over her. The throne beneath her pulsed softly, steady and unwavering, as if reinforcing that change with quiet certainty. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full of everything that had already been understood without words. Then, slowly, Dominic lowered himself. Not into a bow this time. Not into submission, but into something far more deliberate. He knelt. The movement was controlled, precise, and unmistakable. One knee touched the stone step beneath him, his posture straight, his gaze still lifted to meet hers. The reaction in the room was immediate, though no one spoke. It was felt, deep and undeniable, because this was not something they had ever seen before. Not from him. Not from someone who stood above all others without question. Lillian's breath caught, just for a moment, her composure shifting beneath the weight of what she was witnessing. She had expected acknowledgement, perhaps even acceptance. But not this. Never this. The glow of the throne responded instantly, not in intensity, but in presence, wrapping around both of them with a quiet, steady light that felt less like illumination and more like confirmation. Dominic's voice came, low, calm, carrying clearly through the stillness. You were not brought here by accident. The words settled into the space between them, not as explanation, but as truth. Lillian felt them resonate within her, aligning with something she had already begun to understand without fully naming it. She did not speak immediately. She did not need to. The answer was not something that required defense or justification. It simply was. Slowly, she inclined her head, not in submission, not in hesitation, but in acknowledgement. The movement was small, but it carried meaning. The kind that did not need to be spoken aloud. Around them, the room remained still, every person present witnessing something they could not interrupt, could not alter, could not deny. The balance of everything they had known had shifted, and there was no returning to what had been before. Lillian sat upon the throne, no longer uncertain, no longer out of place. And before her, the most powerful man in the room knelt, not in defeat, not in surrender, but in recognition of something greater than both of them. And in that quiet, unshakable moment, the truth became complete. She had not only been chosen, she had been claimed by something even he would not challenge. The moment did not fracture under the weight of what had just occurred. It settled, deep, quiet, irreversible. Lillian sat upon the throne with a stillness that no longer came from caution, but from clarity. The warmth within her had fully anchored now, no longer something she noticed in parts, but something that existed as a whole, steady and complete. It did not overwhelm her. It did not demand anything from her. It simply remained, as though it had always belonged there, waiting for the moment she would finally recognize it. Before her, Dominic Voss remained kneeling, his posture unchanged, his gaze steady, unbroken. The act itself had already spoken more than words ever could, and yet the silence that followed carried even greater weight. It was no longer a question of whether the throne had chosen. That truth had already settled. What remained now was what that choice would become. Lillian felt it shift again, not in the throne, not in him, but in the room itself. The energy that had once been tense, uncertain, filled with expectation and judgment, had softened into something else entirely. Not submission, not fear, recognition. It moved through the hall like a quiet current, touching every person present, reshaping the way they stood, the way they breathed, the way they looked at her. She could feel it without turning. The way the weight of their attention had changed. It no longer pressed against her. It supported something that had already been decided. Dominic exhaled slowly, the motion subtle but deliberate, as though marking the end of something unspoken. Then, with the same controlled precision that defined every movement he made, he rose. Not abruptly, not with haste. He stood, returning to his full height, but the shift did not erase what had just happened. It did not lessen it. If anything, it defined it further. Because he did not step away. He remained where he was, close enough that the connection between them did not break. His gaze remained on hers, steady, unwavering, but now there was something new within it. Not curiosity, not calculation, understanding. The throne does not choose lightly, he said quietly. The words carried through the hall, not as a declaration, but as a reminder. Not to her, to them. Lillian listened, her posture unchanged, her presence no longer something that needed to be justified. The truth of his words did not feel distant. It felt immediate, real. The glow beneath her responded, soft and constant, as though agreeing without needing to speak. Dominic turned then, just slightly, enough to acknowledge the room without fully breaking his alignment with her. This is not a moment to question, he continued, his voice calm, even, leaving no space for argument. It is a moment to witness. The effect was immediate. The last remnants of uncertainty dissolved completely. No one spoke. No one objected. Because there was nothing left to challenge. The authority in his voice did not override the throne. It aligned with it, reinforced it, and in doing so, it made the moment final. Lillian felt something settle within her at those words, something that had been forming since the moment she stepped onto the first stair. It was not power in the way she had once understood it. It was not dominance, not control. It was presence, a quiet, undeniable certainty that she no longer needed to shrink herself to fit within the expectations of others. She did not need to prove anything. She simply needed to be what she already was. Her fingers relaxed fully against the armrests, her shoulders easing in a way that felt natural, unforced. The instinct to leave, to question, to doubt, had faded completely. In its place was something steadier, something that did not need permission. Dominic turned back to her fully, his gaze meeting hers once more, not from above, not from a distance, but from the same space they now shared. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was clear, complete. Then, quietly, he extended his hand, not as a command, not as a demand, but as an offering. Lillian looked at it for a brief moment, her breath steady, her awareness grounded in the quiet rhythm that had not left her since the throne accepted her. Then she lifted her own hand, placing it in his without hesitation. The contact was simple, steady, unforced. But the moment their hands met, something shifted again, not in the room, not in the throne, but between them. The connection that had been unseen, unspoken, now felt anchored, real in a way that could not be denied. The glow beneath her pulsed once more, softer this time, as if settling into its final state. And in that quiet, unwavering stillness, the moment completed itself. Not with noise, not with spectacle, but with certainty, the kind that does not need to announce itself to be understood. The contact between their hands did not fade. It settled, just like everything else had, grounding the moment into something real, something that could not be undone by doubt or dismissed by disbelief. Lillian felt it clearly, the steady warmth beneath her, the quiet rhythm within her chest, and now this connection that extended beyond the throne, beyond the light, into something shared. It was not overwhelming. It was not consuming. It was precise, as if every piece had finally aligned exactly where it was meant to be. Dominic did not tighten his hold. He did not pull her forward or guide her away. He simply held her hand, steady and certain, as though the act itself was enough to confirm what had already been decided. Around them, the hall remained silent, but it was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of acceptance. Not forced, not reluctant, inevitable. Lillian lifted her gaze fully now, no hesitation, no instinct to lower it again. The girl who had stood at the edge of the room, unnoticed and dismissed, no longer existed in the same way. She had not disappeared. She had changed. Or perhaps she had finally been seen. The throne beneath her no longer pulsed with the same quiet intensity as before. The glow had softened, not because it was fading, but because it no longer needed to prove anything. It had done what it was meant to do. It had chosen, and now it rested. Dominic studied her for a moment longer, his expression calm, his presence unwavering, but there was no longer any question in his gaze. Only certainty, only alignment. Then, slowly, he released her hand. Not abruptly, not as an ending, but as a transition. Lillian did not feel the loss of contact as absence. She felt it as continuation, as if the connection remained, no longer dependent on touch to exist. The space between them did not widen. It held. He stepped back one pace, creating just enough distance for the room to breathe again, for the moment to expand beyond the two of them. But even as he moved, the line between them did not break. It had already become something more permanent than proximity. Lillian's hands returned to rest at her sides, her posture composed, her presence no longer something that needed to be justified or defended. She did not look toward the crowd immediately. She did not need to. She could feel them. The shift in their attention, the absence of dismissal, the quiet acknowledgement that had replaced everything that came before. When she finally turned her gaze outward, it was not with hesitation. It was with clarity. The room met her differently now. Heads remained lowered, not in fear, but in recognition. The same people who had once looked past her now held still, their presence reshaped by the truth that had unfolded before them. No one spoke. No one challenged. Because there was nothing left to question. Dominic's voice broke the silence once more, calm, steady, carrying through the hall with quiet finality. It is done. The words did not echo. They settled. They completed what had already been set into motion long before any of them understood it. Lillian felt them resonate within her, not as an ending, but as a beginning she had not been prepared for, yet did not resist. The throne remained beneath her, steady and unchanged, no longer something she needed to leave, no longer something that held her in place. It was simply where she was meant to be. The hall did not erupt. There was no sudden noise, no overwhelming reaction. Only a collective stillness that carried more meaning than any display could have. One by one, slowly, deliberately, the people in the room adjusted their stance, their posture aligning with the truth that had just been declared. Not out of obligation, out of understanding. Lillian took a slow breath, her gaze steady, her presence grounded in a way she had never known before. Whatever came next, whatever this choice would mean beyond this moment, she no longer felt the need to shrink from it. She would face it, as herself, as what she had become. Dominic turned slightly, his position shifting back toward the center of the hall, but his awareness did not leave her. It did not need to. The connection had already been established, anchored in something neither of them had created, but both had accepted. And in the quiet that followed, in the stillness that held the entire room in place, one final truth settled into the foundation of everything they knew. The throne had not only chosen its Luna, it had chosen her in front of a world that would never see her the same way again. And from that moment forward, neither would he.